The Thylacine, or as it is commonly referred to as the Tasmanian Tiger, was a fascinating animal known for being an intriguing case of convergent evolution, as well as for its rapid extinction at the hands of humans. This video was made in order to commemorate the day on which the last Thylacine passed away, known as National Threatened Species Day, and I hope you enjoy learning about these amazing animals that are unfortunately no longer with us. The first thing to note about thylacines is their remarkable case of convergent evolution with canids. Thylacines are marsupials and are of no relation to placental mammals. It is remarkable then that the two clades Meotheria and Eutheria respectively are separated by over 160 million years, and yet through evolution, both clades resulted in forms almost identical to one another as a result of the pressures brought on by their particular environments. These two unrelated species share numerous phenotypic similarities, including an elongated snout with pointed canines, scissor-like molars for snapping up and dismembering prey, large zygomatic arches to support their temporal and masseter muscles, as well as raised heels, meaning that thylacines walked on their toes like other digitigrades, like the aforementioned canids, as well as felids and birds, giving it an increased speed in order to pursue prey, quite unlike other marsupials, which are all, aside from the thylacine, plantigrade. To see that two species, completely unrelated from one another, came to adopt many of the same traits is very interesting from an evolutionary point of view. From first glance, these two skulls of both the thylacine and timber wolf look practically identical, and the skull of a fox is even more similar to that of a thylacine. The scientific name of the Tasmanian tiger, that being Thylacinus cynocephalus, even means pouched animal with the head of a dog, and so given that the skulls were so similar, at Oxford University as part of the final exams, zoology students eventually caught on to the professors that if ever a dog's skull was given out, it was likely that of a thylacine, as anything that was that obviously dog-like had to be a catch. The professors themselves then caught wind of this, and then double-bluffed the students the following year and put in an actual dog skull instead of a thylacine, likely leading to some confused and frustrated students. If you want to be able to tell the differences between these two skulls, there are a few skeletal differences that you can look for. The biggest of these differences is the palatal vacuities in the roof of the mouth, a feature which is present in all marsupials but absent in most placentals. Thylacines also have more teeth than wolves, having 46 compared to the wolves' 42. Thylacines, like other marsupials, also differ in the size and structure of the brain case, which is both smaller and narrower than the placental wolf. Because of this, the corpus callosum, the part of the brain that joins the two halves of the cerebral cortex, is not present, meaning that the overall brain size in thylacines was smaller, not to say they weren't as intelligent, as I'll get into later. The zygomatic arch of thylacines was also larger than a wolf, as well as possessing flared, diamond-shaped nasal bones as opposed to the rectangular nasal bones found in placental carnivores. The molars of thylacines were also flattened and triangular, adapted for slicing and crushing, and lack the pronounced grinding surfaces in the case of canids. In a dorsal view, it is evident that the thylacine also has a much broader forehead, but with a far narrower snout than the wolf. Thylacines also had an enlarged anterior commissure that serves a similar purpose to the corpus callosum. The cerebral cortex of the thylacines, while not as large as placental mammals or connected by the corpus callosum, was enlarged compared to other marsupials, meaning that thylacines likely had higher cognitive function than other marsupials. This enlargement of the cerebral cortex also correlated with the diminishing of the olfactory lobe in the brain, which is tied to the smelling ability of the animal, which in the case of the thylacine would have relied on sight and hearing in order to track down its prey. As mentioned prior, thylacines' molar teeth are intermediate in grinding and slicing function and were quite slender, showing no indication of bone consumption, although first-hand accounts have shown that they do have the ability to eat and digest bone. Like all other marsupials, thylacine joeys were undeveloped at birth, being approximately 2 centimeters in length and a gram in weight. The pouch of the thylacine could fit in a full 4 joeys, at which point it was noted to be nearly touching the ground. Another interesting thing about the pouches of thylacines is that males also possess them, the thylacines being the only known marsupials other than the water opossum to have a pouch in both genders. This pseudo-pouch could not hold young, but was likely used for thermoregulatory purposes, as well as to protect the scrotum from violently swinging while chasing after prey. In terms of maternal care, thylacine mothers maintained and cared for their young until they were around the same size as the mother, and were noted to have a close bond with their young and vice versa. Pups were noted to be vocal, snapping and barking just like dogs, although if given a piece of meat, they would not fight over it, but instead allowing the one who received the food to finish their fill before moving in themselves. Sexual dimorphism was also present in these animals, with males being 14% larger and less agile, hunting larger prey such as wombats and wallabies, whilst females, being smaller and faster, likely preyed on bandicoots, lizards, birds, and other smaller marsupials. Male thylacines had a proportionally larger skull with a longer face, whereas females had a shorter muzzle but with proportionally larger teeth. This is a result of intraspecific and intersexual competition between males and females, which comes with its own advantages. A wider diet across the sexes means that males and females weren't competing for the same resources, and in periods where certain prey was absent, animals can still find prey, as their diets are varied enough to cope with the changes in prey availability. Thylacines were noted to target the nasal region of prey, that which included sheep, then eating said nasal area, as well as the heart, lungs and liver, and occasionally a patch of flesh from the foreflank. A study in 2011 by Attard et al. Cast doubt on the thylacine's ability to kill large prey, that which included sheep, due to an inherently weak jaw. The findings from the study inferred that thylacines were vulnerable to extinction for this very reason, as it was in direct competition with the quoll and Tasmanian devil for the same food sources, meaning that the thylacine was a specialist of small prey. This study has been called into question, however, as the skull used in the study was that of a thylacine that died at Moore Park Zoo in Sydney. This animal was fed solely on horse meat and was at least 6 years old by the time of its death, factors that do not appear to have been taken into consideration in the study, not to mention it also conflicts with historical fact and first-hand accounts. Domestic sheep offer little resistance to predators, and therefore it is not hard to believe that a thylacine with a well-placed bite to the snout of the animal would cripple and kill it. So all in all, I wouldn't say this paper is too accurate to the real strength of thylacine jaws. The behaviour of the thylacine was little understood due to its limited study in rapid extinction. What is known is that thylacines were unique in having the largest gape of any known mammal, able to open their jaws a remarkable 80 degrees. This huge gape has been theorised to assist in catching small, fast-moving animals like wallabies. In theory, the greater the gape, the greater the grasp. The gaping yawn was also a threat warning for agonistic behaviour, as well as if an animal felt threatened. The thylacine featured in this video, the name of which we'll get into later, ended up biting the cameraman, David Leo, evidence that the thylacine felt threatened by the presence of the camera. Thylacines, when excited, were also capable of standing on their hind legs, akin to a kangaroo, with their rigid, inflexible tails providing them balance and enabling them to hop a short distance. After going over the anatomy of the thylacine, how exactly did these animals come to be? The history of the family the species T. cynocephalus belongs to stretches far back into the Tertiary period, and thylacine species of many shapes and sizes evolved since the Oligocene, such as the large Thylacinus macnesi and the even larger Thylacinus potens, with there being a radiation of Thylacinidae around the Miocene epoch, with T. cynocephalus being the only species to have survived into recorded history. Aboriginal cave art on the Australian mainland shows that they were still present there up until a few thousand years ago. Thylacines eventually became extinct in Australia around 2,000 years ago, likely through competition with humans and the introduced dingo, climate change, as well as the low genetic diversity that was likely present in the population. Thylacines were now restricted to the island of Tasmania, where they would continue to survive in small numbers, although this wasn't to last. When humans first arrived in Tasmania, thylacines were demonised due to their intimidating appearance and ability to kill the farmers' defenceless sheep. This led to many bounties being taken up to rid the island of the so-called pests, quickly decimating the population as upwards of 3,000 animals were killed over the decades leading up to the 1930s. Thylacine numbers dropped considerably, and eventually the last wild thylacine known was killed on the 6th of May 1930 by farmer Wilfred Batty. Taking 20 minutes to die after a shot to the shoulder, the thylacine slowly faded away, likely taking its species along with it. The last known captive thylacine, going by the name of Benjamin, lived out his days in Beaumaris Zoo, Hobart, from 1933 to 1936, unknowingly among the last of his kind. For the longest time, Benjamin's gender remained uncertain, until eventually in 2010, the male identity of Benjamin was reaffirmed, as when analysing the footage, in a few short seconds, a scrotal sac is visible, confirming Benjamin to be a male animal. Ironically, Benjamin was the only thylacine to have received full legal protection a full 2 months earlier in the year, but by that point, it was already too late. On the 7th of September 1936, Benjamin passed away, ending the story of the Tasmanian tiger. Numerous sightings since then have been reported of living thylacines, some by reputable sources, but as of yet, no clear evidence has been put forward to state that thylacines still survive in the present day. Whether they be critically endangered or extinct, the tragic tale of the Tasmanian tiger is a provocative story of what can happen when an animal is viewed as a nuisance, and the innumerable losses that arise when it is wiped off of the face of the earth. As an acknowledgement, I would recommend reading through the Thylacine Museum, a website that gave me much of the information presented in this video, giving me a fascinating insight into the biology, behaviour, and plenty of other information on the thylacine, some of which I'd previously not known of, so be sure to read through it if you have the time and interest. With that, I thank you for watching. See you later.